The Batman was probably my most anticipated film of the year, but the real question is it the best Batman film we've ever had? And I have to say, I think it is. You know, jokes aside, I do like the Dark Knight trilogy, but to me it was always, missing sort of the vibe of Batman. The ultra realistic, I think, was too much, and it sort of lost some of the creativity that's part of other Batman medias. One of my biggest problems is Gotham wasn't Gotham to me. It just felt like any other city. Whereas this, I've really got to see what I wanted to. And especially with Gotham, they've absolutely nailed it in this film. It feels like this horrible place that no one would want to live, but they're sort of trapped there. And, it creates this great atmosphere throughout the film. Like, they've really nailed the setting, and it's such an important part of, Batman. This film also is definitely more of a detective film than what we've seen before, Batman in previous films, sometimes it does slight detective work, but it's never really played into that angle as sort of a major point of the film. Whereas this one is pretty much a detective film. You know what I mean? It is about sort of tracking down a killer, and it's quite grounded in that aspect. And I really like that. I've been wanting to see sort of the detective work for a really long time, and it really does go into that sort of crime genre. But I would say just go and watch it. You won't regret it. I think it is a really good film, and it is a really good Batman film as well. And I don't think you'll be disappointed. The first part of this review is going to be non-spoilers, but like I said, just go and see it for yourself. I think that'll give you the best sort of, experience and idea. I think it's way better going into something blank. But first I want to talk about the cast. And, Robert Pattinson, when he was cast as Batman, I think there was a lot of skepticism sort of around him getting the role. I have to be honest, when he was sort of announced, it's not the actor I sort of expected, but I don't know who I did expect. But I never had sort of worries about him. It kind of made sense in a weird way. And I have to say, I think he does a really good job, and I think he could potentially be my favourite Batman. He really does embody the character really well. At this stage in sort of Batman's journey, when he's new and he's like really into it, you get the sense that this role has almost... he's being consumed by hatred almost, and it's sort of destroying his idea of hope. And Robert Pattinson does a really good job of portraying that, this person who's sort of being broken down in terms of his humanity. And he does such a good job. Moments in the film, not to get into too heavy spoilers, where you can see him sort of trying to resist to act human. Does that make sense? He does such a good job because he feels so out of place when he has to act like a normal human being. And there's not tons of that in this film, but I like that. It makes so much sense. It is the early years, and he's very much trapped himself into just being Batman. We've also got Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman, who does a really good job. She's in the film quite a lot, and she's one of the major characters. And, they actually give her something to do. She ain't just sort of there. And I quite like that, and her and Robert Pattinson have really good chemistry, and you sort of believe the relationship there. And she just does a really good job of portraying, this sort of femme fatale type character. We've also got Jeffrey Wright as Commissioner Gordon, and yeah, he does a great job. His and sort of Robert Pattinson's sort of back and forth are great. They work together for quite a lot of the film, and they do work well together. And he does such a good job of sort of being this cop who you can tell has been around for a long time, but you can see he's a lot more human than Batman. He's disturbed by stuff, and I love how he's sort of the human in the situation, almost like what the audience is, whereas when it jump phase Batman and he's like that's horrible. I think they make a great duo in that sense. We've also got Paul Dano as the Riddler, and I had no doubts about his casting. He's great in pretty much everything I've seen him in. And, he's great in this. He's not in the film a whole lot, but when he is on, he does such a good performance. And, it's very different from, what Jim Carrey did with the Riddler. But this is so much better, if you ask me. I think it makes it the Riddler not a joke anymore, but keeps a lot of his character in terms of, he's an intellectual, he's not a physical fighter. It still keeps that, with him still being this sort of loose cannon who could sort of go off at any second. And he does this really unsettling and great performance. And probably the biggest shocker of the cast is Colin Farrell as the Penguin. It's honestly mad, the makeup. You can barely tell it's him. I think maybe the only way you can tell is sort of in his eyes. Sometimes I'm seeing Colin Farrell, but it's honestly spotless throughout the film. And he does such a good job of embodying the character, you completely forget it's him. And I'm glad to say he's in the film quite a lot, Penguin. You know, I thought he was going to be only a sort of a minor role in this, but I'm glad he's, you know, quite prominent in the film. And, you know, there's a lot of interactions with him. You know, we get you've seen in the trailer, there's that chase scene where Batman's after him. And that, you know, he's great there. He's pretty much great in every scene, the Penguin. You know, he really brings that sense of this, like, old school mobster almost. And he does it really well. Speaking of sort of the mobsters, we've got John Turturro as Falcone. And, you know, Falcone is usually quite a small character in Batman films and Batman media. You know, he's often sort of a bit character, but you know, he has quite a heavy presence in this film, and he's quite a major part of the story, which I'm glad to see again. You know, it's really packed a lot into that 3-hour runtime without it feeling super bloated, and I do think that 3-hour runtime was needed. I know some people might disagree with that. But yeah, I pretty much knew John Turturro off getting weed on by Bumblebee. So, you know, I haven't really seen him in a whole lot, but he does great here. You know, he does such a good job of this. You know, he's not a physically imposing person, but, you know, it's just the sense like, you know, he knows people, and he does a really good job of being that mobster want to get his hands dirty, and it's great. He's great throughout the film. There's also Andy Serkis as Alfred, and unfortunately he ain't in the film a lot, which I think is a bit of a shame. But, you know, I like him as Alfred. I think he don't get a lot of time to shine, and hopefully we see him more, you know, in a sequel or whatever. But, you know, I have to say, like, I thought we'd see him more, and, you know, I've heard there's like a 4-hour cut of this film, and maybe we saw him more then. There is one thing I don't get, though. Like, Alfred's his butler, but then Alfred has, like, a butler as well in the film. You'll get what I mean when you see it. It's a bit odd that I didn't really get it. But yeah, overall, the cast is amazing. Even the people I haven't mentioned who are smaller roles, you know, no one is a weak link. Everyone does a great job. And it really helps create that world of Gotham, you know. These characters feel lived in almost, you know what I mean? They don't feel like just actors doing a role. They do feel like the characters. And honestly, the cast is absolutely flawless. And I'd love to see, you know, sequels, because I think, you know, this cast and, you know, who they could cast as other characters, it could really grow. Someone's really got an eye for getting the right people for these roles, and I hope that continues in the sequels. Gotham is absolutely nailed in this film. You know, we've had a lot of renditions of Gotham on screen. I've said, you know, the Dark Knight trilogy, Gotham isn't Gotham, it's just a city at that point. You know, it felt too realistic for me. I think you need some of that, you know, because it is a made-up location, so it can be made up. You know, you get what I'm saying with that? But then we've had stuff like the Tim Burton films, and they're just, you know what I mean? So this strikes a really good balance of a mix of the two, where, you know, it has those comic book elements, you know, it's very like neon and lit up, and it's, you know, raining all the time, and it's horrible, and there's wreckages and fires, but it feels real. It feels like a city that could exist, and I think that's a really good middle ground to make. And we really do get to explore Gotham in this film. You know, there's a few locations we visit a few times, and you really get a sense of what the place is like, and, you know, you get the sense of that, you know, criminal, and it feels like if you took a walk, you'd have to take a shower afterwards, and it does such a good job, you know, just from the opening, and then it just gets progressively better and better as we see more and more of Gotham. I'm happy to report as well, the fight sequences are amazing in this film. I think Batman has always been limited by the costume when it comes to fight sequences. You know, I'd say the best one we have is the Batman v Superman one. You say what you want about that film, but the fight in the warehouse is great. And other than that, Batman fights tend to be pretty stiff. In this, they're so well done. You know, you can tell they've built the costume around being able to do, you know, action parts and stuff like that. It's none of this sort of horrible shaky cam, proper zoomed in fighting. You know, you properly get to see it. You know, there's great choreography, and there's a variety of different action sequences. You know, you've seen a few in the trailer, and, you know, you've got the car scene that you've seen in the trailer, and, you know, it's great, and it spreads it out quite well over the film, so, you know, it doesn't feel like a huge chunk of film is missing sort of an action bit, you know what I mean? And it doesn't feel like an action bit's been inserted to gauge your attention again. The costumes for everyone in this film are also great as well. Catwoman's suit is, you know, I don't know what you can do with Catwoman's suit, you know, that they've handled it as well as they could, but the Batman suit, the best one we've had by far. It is such a good suit. It's armoured, but it doesn't make him invincible. And just the manoeuvrability and the practicality look of it, I think it's great, and it looks so good, and it's not like sort of Ben Affleck's where it makes him look like a tank almost. You know, you could see this version of Batman being stealthy, and he is in a few places. The tech and equipment, I like how his grapple gun, you know, it's sort of lodged in his gauntlet now instead of it being an actual sort of accessory he pulls off. You know, just a great suit overall. Right, now I am going to get onto more spoilers, so if you haven't seen the film, I recommend sort of going off here. You know, do see it for yourself. I think you will be pleasantly surprised if you have your doubts going into it. If you're hyped for it, it'll meet more than your expectations. It did for me. Okay, so on to spoilers. So I know sort of a criticism that people have with this film is that there's not a lot of the Bruce Wayne persona from, you know, Batman Bruce Wayne, where he's, you know, this billionaire playboy. And to be honest, I didn't mind that because I think it fits with, you know, his arc in this film, which I'll talk about later. And I think we're going to see that more in the sequel or sequels, with him building this sort of persona up to sort of deflect attention from the fact that he is Batman. I thought we were going to see that in this film. I honestly have to say, you know, not seeing that, it wasn't a disappointment because, you know, with the whole sort of film as the big picture, I get why they didn't include it, and it's clearly setting that up for a future film. I love that it showed how much he was into being the Batman at this point. You know, his life was pretty much consumed by it, to the point where he wasn't even human anymore. He was almost just sort of this force of nature. And, you know, I like that. It really drove home his sort of insane sort of side. You know, it starts with him doing a narration, and it's revealed that's him sort of writing in his journal. And the comparison to him and Riddler, how Riddler's got the journals, you know, it's a great point there where, you know, Batman is down a different path. He could have been this guy. I think that's such a great idea to link the villains when they really don't get much time together. Do you get what I mean? But that sort of helps them connect in a weird way. And I love how it shows sort of his eyeliner, you know, and, you know, when he takes the mask off and his hair's all over the place, it really drives home that fact that he does not care, you know, how he's presented or, you know, what people think of him. He just cares, you know, his mind's like zeroed in on just being Batman. And I think it's great, and you get to see sort of throughout the film, I think Catwoman's a big part of that, where it brings out the human side of him, you know, non-vengeance. And, you know, I think that's great, you know, and by the end of the film, you definitely see that he is becoming more human again. Does that make sense? You'll get what I mean if you've seen the film. This film also sort of takes something from the Telltale games, where it was, you know, Bruce's parents not exactly being like saint. And I'm glad it didn't do them as like outright villains. You know, that's something new, and we haven't really seen in the others. They always present his parents as, you know, these idols in the city. And if it was that way, you know, they'd have probably been killed off way sooner. So I'm glad it's sort of this small little thing of making a mistake almost. And I think that's sort of a big theme throughout the film, if you notice. Like a ton of the Riddler's victims, you see moments where they're not just pure selfishness, as much as they have done terrible things or are involved in terrible things. You know, like even the mayor, it starts with him playing with his kid, and, you know, the kid is clearly sad to see his dad dead. I think that shows a great point, because even though he did do bad things, it shows in some aspect of his life, you know, he was kind and thoughtful and thought of something more than himself. And it shows sort of how the villain's way of thinking in this sort of black and white way, you know, doesn't correlate to how people are. Gil Colson, the DA who dies, even says he's not going to say it because he's got a family. It's small stuff like that where it hints, you know, these people are humans. And I think that did a great job. Often when you sort of do this idea of someone taking down some high, rich people, it never gives them a human element. And it tries to trick you into rooting for this villainous character almost. And I like how this didn't, you know, it presented you with all the things and you can sort of choose. But another big revelation in the film is that Falcone is Catwoman's father. This wasn't a huge surprise. A lot of people had sort of been speculating online beforehand. And, you know, I think it was good because it did add quite a layer to, you know, Catwoman as a character. And again, it's something new. I was a little confused though the first time I saw it when, you know, he didn't know who she was when she's going to kill him. But, you know, upon a few rewatches, I've noticed, he knew he had a kid with this woman, then the kid got taken off, and he didn't know she was that kid. So if any of you were sort of confused by that, like I was, but I have to say, that it's such a great little dynamic there. And well, I don't like the idea, but it's an interesting idea how, she says her mother was killed by strangulation, and throughout the film, we see sort of Falcone's signature move is strangling people. We get that sort of horrific scene where the audio of her flatmate is sort of being played over the phone. And, it's so disturbing, and it does such a good job of just playing with audio. And, you can really visualise the situation. And, he even tries to choke her at the end. So I think that's strongly hinting that he killed her mother. But, I think it's great. He did such a good job of being this sort of selfish, evil mobster who, really had his finger in a lot of pies, and, it did a great job. Now on to sort of Riddler. Like I said, Paul Dano did a great job, but his overall plan of the film and, the execution of him was really well done. The opening scene is honestly amazing, where he's just stood there, and then he lets out that yell, and he's just wailing on that guy. And, it's so uncomfortable, and it does such a good job, and it feels like almost this loose cannon, and I like how he just caused sort of a lot of upset in the world. I wish it kind of explored that more, because, unlike Batman, this guy is just come out of nowhere and he's killing, you know what I mean? And I love the little twist of how he got all the pictures. He's been there the whole time. He lives literally outside the club. That's such good stuff for Riddler, I think, where it's, a lot of him outsmarting was, people were overthinking things. There's a bit with the URL. It's stuff like that which is so good. And, he's left the clue with the weapon he's using. It's like a carpet tucker. It's little stuff like that, and I think it did a really good job of making Riddler seem smart without Batman looking dumb. Because Batman was still figuring stuff out, but oftentimes he was overthinking a lot of stuff. And I think that matches up with Batman so well. And I think it also matches with the idea that Batman is still young and very vengeful and often sort of impatient. I love the sort of, when you see him going to the club, the first time he tries to get in there as Batman, I love how there's a bit of a jokey moment where Gordon's like, you need a warrant. And then the next scene is just him sort of beating people up and going in by himself. And you can see throughout the film, he gets less and less sort of impatient and sort of angry. He does calm down, and he thinks more tactically. Because Riddler is a villain, he can't beat physically. He can't beat him with his anger. He needs to beat him with his brain. I'd say the only bit of Riddler's thing that was a bit random, and I wish it had sort of more hints to, was the blowing up of the seawall. I thought that were just a little bit random. I enjoyed the sequence, but I wish there'd been more set up to the wall. I think there's like a brief mention of it at the beginning on sort of the news report, and that's it. But yeah, honestly, Riddler's stuff is great, and his little sort of, how he's sort of a keyboard warrior, he's so good. It fits so well with the character into sort of the modern age. And when we see him sort of doing his live streams, I honestly think the best bits of Paul Dano's performance. His best bit is definitely the guy when he's got the bomb around his neck, and he's treating it like a game show. And you really get a sense of how unhinged this guy is, even if his morals could be somewhat looked at as good. Clearly this guy isn't, you know what I mean? He's enjoying killing. And then at the end, in the sequence where, it's all flooded and we get sort of the reveal that he's got his Discord server all sort of working with him.
Nah, I'm with my...
I like that because I think I've watched the film 3 times now, and you can see hints throughout of, people are supporting him, and there's clearly some people who really support this guy. When you see the sort of funeral for the mayor, and you see outside and they've all got the signs, and it's very interesting because he's almost created this sort of mini cult, and I honestly think that works quite well. There's a bit in the mayor bit where there's a guy speaking, and, with the way it sort of laid out that little interaction between Bruce Wayne and this guy who was sort of complaining about the rich, I thought, is he going to turn out to be like Joe Chill or something? But, no, he's the guy at the end, I'm pretty sure. And, when he says, I'm vengeance, it's honestly so good. I think it really drives home the message of this film. And to be honest, I don't think you really see it, but as soon as that character says that, you piece it all together, just as Batman does. And it's such a good sort of layout for a thing. I wasn't a fan of it the first time I saw the film. I thought the ending were pretty anticlimactic because it was just sort of a bunch of goons who were fighting. But, you know, the more I think about it, the more I enjoy that idea. And, you know, to lead on from that, going into sort of Batman's arc in this film, I think it's great. You know, Batman is sometimes somewhat neglected when it comes to his personal journey throughout the films. You know, it very much just focuses on him. He's a superhero, he's stopping crime. But this does take a real effort, and he is definitely the main character of the story in terms of character growth. You know, I like the idea, I don't know if this has been confirmed or not, that the media sort of came up with the idea of calling him Batman, and he still hasn't taken that name on. You know, he introduces himself as Vengeance, and that's such a good point. And in the trailers, we were all like, yeah, we're going to see, like, dark, you know, brutal Batman. And, you know, we get that, and I love the point of Batman. He's got to be more, you know, he can't just be vengeance, that's one half of him, but he's also got to inspire hope. You know, you can just look at the sort of the monologue at the beginning, at the end, and you can see how the character's changed. You know, he's, at the beginning, great sequence of him narrating as these criminals see the bat signal and are terrified. Honestly, that's amazing. You know, he should be like a slasher villain to these villains. He should be your worst nightmare. And when he comes out, you know, you have the big, like, T-Rex stomping sound, and when he comes out the dark and he just beats up all those criminals, it's great. You know, you get the idea that he is vengeance. And then the end is him saving people. You know, that's what I like. You know, it starts with him beating up criminals, which is definitely one part of it, but he's not sympathetic to the person he saved. You know, he somewhat ignores him in a, you know, in a way. You know, his mind is focused on the hatred and, you know, defeating evil. It isn't focused on saving good. And it does such a good job how it ends with that. And I think it's such a great new story for Batman. You know, I didn't expect that going into it. And, you know, I thought we were going to get sort of the angle of, is he going to kill or is he not going to kill, you know? But this is something so new, and I don't think we've seen it properly in a Batman film before. We might have had hints to this sort of idea where he's becoming what Gotham really means in a personal sense, but this does such a good job. You know, the bat signal starts off as a call for him but a warning to criminals, but by the end it's a call for him, a warning to criminals, and a beacon of hope, and that represents him as the character. And, you know, this isn't an origin story, but by the end of it he becomes Batman, you know, what the people have chosen the name for him. You know, it's stuff like that, and essentially it is a weird origin story in a way. You know, I think it's great. The cinematography in this film is also absolutely amazing. It's so unique and something so new. It plays around a lot with focus, and sometimes that can be a bit of a risk because it can sometimes get annoying, but this does it so well, and it creates this very unique viewing experience, which I haven't really seen before with, you know, you'll have to see it to see what I mean, but the focus sort of shifting and manipulation is great, and it does great with, like, colours and stuff like that. It's a very colourful film, and, you know, scenes even that are dark, you can see what's going on. You know, that's always an issue when stuff's set at night, or it uses CGI, they try and cover it up in dark, but I have to say, cinematography is top notch, and it really knocks it out of the park. And just before we go, I do want to sort of talk about the soundtrack. I probably should have included this in non-spoilers, but I like to keep this right at the end. Honestly brilliant, you know, every bit of music is amazing, you know. We have the use of the Nirvana song, Something in the Way, and I think it's only used twice in the film, you know, the beginning and the close. And, you know, that's great, you know, it fits this aesthetic and feels so well. But the original soundtrack is amazing. There's not a single weak piece, you know. The main theme, I think it's called Vengeance, you know, that's great, and they have a few renditions of that. I love the bit, if you've seen the film, where he's, you know, he's stopped Penguin, you see it in the trailer, and he's, like, walking towards him, and it starts with a bit of a guitar riff, and it has a bit of a westerny feel to it, and then we get sort of the boots walking, and there's sort of a click, you know, metallic click sort of happening. So I like that little moment, as, you know, sort of the music swells up. But also Riddler's theme is so good. It's this creepy and weird, sort of uncomfortable, unsettling piece. and it does such a good job. You know, just overall, the soundtrack is amazing. Same with the sound effects, you know, the ambience of Gotham is amazing. You get the sense that it's alive and, you know, it's raining all the time, and, you know, it feels like there is a world around them, whereas a lot of films kind of somewhat neglect sound like that. You know, it does such a good job of feeling alive. And, you know, I've got to talk about the Batmobile sort of booting up. You know, the sound of that is so great. Not a big fan of the Batmobile design, but, you know, if this is going to be the starting one, I think it's fine. Hopefully we see it sort of upgraded, which I think we're going to get with his sort of cape as well, you know, so it can glide instead of the wingsuit. But yeah, overall, I think this film is great, and it's definitely my favourite Batman film. It nails so many aspects, and it does so much I wanted to see. It did so much I didn't know I wanted to see, and I got. And, you know, it didn't go the direction I thought it was going to go. You know, I thought we were going to get stuff like Court of Owls in this. And, you know, I'm glad we didn't. You know, I think this does such a good job, and I think the 3 hour runtime is definitely justified because there is a lot in here. And I know some people might complain about the pacing. I thought it was fine. No real complaints. I thought it did a really good job. You know, it didn't feel like 3 hours to me watching it. And I've watched it 3 times now, and it's still really entertaining. And I'm always picking up on sort of new bits, especially sort of leading to the Riddler reveal of him having this large gang. But yeah, I cannot wait to see what sort of comes next. I'd say maybe my only worry is this has took a very grounded approach, you know, not as much as the Dark Knight films, but, you know, are we going to see villains like Man-Bat and Killer Croc and, you know, some of the more wacky ones like Poison Ivy? You know, I think it's unfortunate because we're probably not going to get to see them, but, you know, that's not a problem with this film. You know, we might see, you know, it might explore more supernatural sort of elements, I guess that's the right word, in the next film, whereas this one's been very grounded to get people in. But yeah, overall, I have to say the score for this film is probably, I don't know, should I give it a 9? I think I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. I don't know what else I'd want to see from a Batman film. I think it does such a good job. And it's definitely met my expectations and definitely exceeded them in a few places. So overall, an amazing film, and I can't wait to see what comes next. So yeah, that's pretty much it. See ya.
He's one of the guys that got into it with at the Iceberg Lounge. What do you think?
Suck your mouth!